Welcome everyone to our presentation tonight. We're going to give it just a few minutes to allow people to get in the workshop before we get started. But I welcome you here. We're tonight talking about rural North Carolina's critical need for school psychologists. What can we do? You may hope that you did attend one of our workshops earlier this year, where we looked at the broad issue of school psychologists and the understaffing across North Carolina. And one of the things that we're doing tonight is we're trying to hone in and look a lot more closely at what's happening in our rural counties. And so this is really critical. We're also I want to say right now, before I forget, we're going to be having another workshop around school psychologists in January, where we're going to be looking at preschool services. Why are we paying a lot of attention to this right now? Because we know how critical it is to have these helping professionals in our schools. And we'll talk about that more tonight as well. So I've given it a few minutes. I think we can go ahead and get started. So I just want to introduce myself quickly. I am Yvonne Brannon. I'm chair of Public Schools First. I am a former social worker, so I have a kindred spirit towards all helping professionals, and I know how critical their role is in our schools and in our community at large. I also am research director for social science research at NC State. And I'm going to go ahead and let Dr. Ruth now introduce himself and our guests.
How you doing, everyone? My name is Terrence Ruth, and I'm also a professor at NC State School of Social Work. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to introduce such amazing presenters. So we have Racheal Gliniak, who is a nationally certified psychologist in Stanley County schools. She received her undergraduate degree from the State University of New York. She currently is in Wayne County Public Schools. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from the West Virginia University Institute of Technology and her master's degree in psychology, along with her educational specialist degree in school psychology from Marshall University. Racheal is a member of the National School Psychology Association and the North Carolina School Psychology Association. She served as an expert on the State Superintendent's Working Group on Student Health and Well-Being. Our next panelist is Sam Manduca, and she is a school psychologist in Stanley County Schools. She received her undergraduate degree from the State University of New York College at Geneseo and her master's degree in school psychology from the City University of New York at Queens College. She completed her internship at Rowan's Salisbury Schools. Ms. Manduca has completed the Prepare training through NASP. She has training in trauma-informed schools and crisis prevention and is a member of NCSPA. Thank you and welcome, panelists, for being here, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. You're on mute, Yvonne.
I knew it would happen sooner or later. All of our guests understand you can't get through a Zoom meeting without somebody being on mute. I'm sorry, it's me. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. So we just want to talk a little bit about our agenda. We're going to be looking at the role of the school psychologists, what they actually do in our schools. We want to take a quick look at some of the North Carolina statistics. We are going to talk to Racheal and Sam about some of the rural experiences they have in their county and the challenges that come with working in a rural county. But we want to end with what we hope are some really interesting solutions to what we can do at the local level, what we can do at the statewide level, what parents, advocates, civic organizations can do. So we're really excited about this, and if you'll hang with us at the end, we will allow time and entertain your questions, and hopefully you can save those up and be ready for us at the end of our presentation. So with that, let's get going.
So I want to talk to you guys about what school psychologists can do for you. I just want to briefly go over some of the specifics about school psychologists. Most school psychologists will either have a master's degree with a certificate of advanced studies or an educational specialist degree, or they'll have a doctorate degree in school psychology. According to the North Carolina State Board of Education, we have the highest educational requirements in the school system for licensure. School psychologists like myself and Sam work with students, families, educators, administrators, and communities to ensure all of our students have the supports that they need to be successful. We provide direct and indirect interventions to support students with social, emotional, and academic skills. We provide mental and behavioral health. But we can only do that when there are enough of us to be able to do the work. Our practice model that we have for the National Association of School Psychologists really breaks us into direct and indirect services. And those services are at the student level, the school level, and the system level as a whole. Currently, our school systems and mental health services are simply inadequate to help the needs of the students and communities because we're short of school psychologists and other mental health professionals in the schools. So a little bit about me. I started off in North Carolina in Franklin County Schools. I was one of 4 school psychologists there. They worked really hard to make sure all of us were staffed together so we were able to talk to each other and lean on each other for support. But there were only 4 of us for the whole county. Our ratio was about 1 to 2,000 kids. And in that model, in that school system, we were seen as the testers. We would get evaluation requests through the courier. We would find the student, we would go to the school, do an evaluation. We'd go back to our office and write the report, and then we'd send it back through the mail. And we weren't invited to meetings typically to be able to go over those results. So teams were left to their own devices to figure out what our reports meant and what that meant for eligibility and services for students. And that's not why I got into school psychology. That was my first job after finishing internship where I had comprehensive services I could provide. So with that lack of support and being able to fulfill my role, I did go elsewhere. I did work at the Eastern North Carolina School for the Deaf for a year. And in that school system, there was always a crisis mode. I had completed dozens of suicide risk assessments. And we were always trying to just put the fires out. There wasn't any prevention work being done at that school. I worked very closely with a clinical social worker, and where it was a residential program, we actually had a psychiatrist on staff. So it was really nice to be able to work in that comprehensive role with those other professionals. But there was no support at the administration school level for us to be able to really do what we needed to do. I was able to do some counseling with a lot of students that had self-injurious behavior and chronic problems with their family lives. So I was able to do what I needed to do, but it was quickly led to burnout because I was the only school psychologist. I had no one to lean on and talk to that understood the role that I was doing. I worked in Wilson County schools for 2.5 years. Last year we had 4 different interim directors, so it was really hard to work when you had no leadership. Last year I served 5 different schools, 1 elementary, 3 middle, and 1 high school. So it was very difficult for us to be able to do any comprehensive services. Our previous interim director, when I decided to leave Wilson County, had said, your primary and only goal is to do evaluations and make sure our timelines are met. You're not to go to meetings, and we don't need you to do counseling. We need you to get our testing done. So now I'm in Wayne County. We are still at a ratio of 1 to 2,000, but the administration and the school system is very supportive of school psychologists. We're able to do crisis response. We're able to go into schools and do meetings. We're able to work collaboratively. And it's understood that we will have 2 primary schools where we do our services, and the schools that we don't have the capacity to cover, we will consult with. So there's a lot of different models out there, and I've seen really the differences that school systems can have with what they use.
All right. So I like Dr. Ruth talked a little bit about, was born and raised in New York, and that is where I got my undergrad and graduate degree. But I knew that I never wanted to stay in New York because there is an oversaturation of school psychologists in New York, which is quite the opposite of what we see here in North Carolina. For every open position, there's about 100 applicants. And I knew that there were shortages throughout the country. And the whole reason I wanted to be a school psychologist was to go to a state where there were shortages. So I was able to come to North Carolina and complete my internship with Rowan Salisbury Schools. And I had an amazing internship experience. I got to do counseling and consultation as well as testing because that was worked into part of my agreement for when I was an intern. I needed that comprehensive experience. After internship, it became very heavy on testing. And so when I became an employee and no longer an intern, I was doing a lot of testing. And it led to high burnout. I had 8 schools, and I tested every incoming preschooler for the whole district. I was part of the play-based assessment team, so I was doing all of those as well. And I didn't have the opportunity to build relationships with staff or students. I just would test them and then write reports, and it led to me burning out pretty quickly. I was only 2 years in and already was wondering what I had gotten into. So I started applying to other districts throughout the state and around my area. And Stanley County Schools, that's what FCS stands for, they had been without a school psychologist for a while, I think a little bit over a year. And so when I came to Stanley County Schools for an interview, they were very excited to have a school psychologist apply. They hadn't had one even apply in a while. And luckily, they were willing to negotiate with me. When I first met with them, they said, you'll have 11 schools and you will just test and write reports. And I told them that that was not something I was interested in. And I think due to them not having a school psychologist and not having any applicants, they were more willing to negotiate my job description. So I came back in with the superintendent, the EC director, this EC is Exceptional Children, and myself. We met and we sort of looked at other job descriptions for school psychologists that was a comprehensive role. And we talked about what they needed and what I needed in my job. And we wrote down my job description on that day, which was really nice to be able to be a comprehensive school psychologist. And so there are some troubles that I deal with daily. Being the only school psychologist for Stanley County Schools, I have about 22 schools, and my ratio is 1 to 8,500 students approximately. We have about 84 and change enrolled in Stanley County Schools right now. I get to have contracted psychologists that do a lot of my testing in most of my schools. I delegate the work to them. For testing, I do testing in 4 schools, and I'm based mostly at the 4 schools where I attend meetings and build relationships with staff. But for crisis and for threat assessments, I go to every school in the county. So I am the emotional mental health support for every school. And then testing and EC services, I'm at 4 main schools. So I don't just test and write reports anymore. I get to do all aspects of my training, and I really do get to touch on every area of the National Association of School Psychologists practice model, which is really nice. Thank you. So in February of 2020, North Carolina did a report where they found that there were about 980 full-time employed school psychologists in the 115 public school districts in North Carolina. Many counties reported only using contract services. So a county like mine, they reported having 3 psychologists, but they actually didn't. They had none on staff until I came along the end of February. They instead reported that because they used the full-time salaries to pay their contracted psychologists. So they didn't have anyone in the schools going to meetings, consulting with teachers, explaining reports, or providing any mental health services to any of the students. there is a vast range of reports on how psychologists are assigned throughout North Carolina. So like Racheal said, some school psychologists are stationed at their county office, and that's where they spend most of their time or all of their time. And some school psychologists are stationed at schools, like me. I have my office in an elementary school with my calm down corner and my supports and services for students in that building. And so that is where I am based. But throughout North Carolina, it depends county to county how they assign their school psychologists. Also, school psychologists surveyed reported that a majority of them were only spending 0 to 10% of their time involved in essential duties based on their professional standards. So National Association of School Psychologists has standards for us, and 0 to 10% of us are able to actually perform our job duties. I was part of that percentage at that time when I filled out this report, because I was at a district where I was only testing and writing reports, I would say 98% of my time. So a majority of us are not doing what we're supposed to be doing based on our training and based on our education and our job descriptions. Majority of us reported that we're unhappy in their job and are not planning to continue to work in the field or current job setting, which I felt a lot when I felt burnt out. Also, another downside that and kind of barrier we're facing is that the maximum state funded salary in North Carolina is $13,000 below the national average. So our highest possible pay grade is still $13,000 below the average, national average. And many comments that were noted on this survey for reasons why school psychologists were dissatisfied with their role was that they had lack of support and understanding by directors and administrators, lack of ability to support, prevent, and provide intervention efforts. They're continuously operating in crisis mode. So kind of what Racheal talked about at her one school, just constantly having to deal with student mental health referrals and mental health referrals being left unaddressed. Salary is one of the things that was responded on. Extensive level of paperwork involved in the special education process, which I can vouch for. There's lots of paperwork. Being viewed as testers and not utilized to deliver other essential services to students, and failure to invest in recruitment and retention results that causes continuous turnover and long-standing vacancies. So another survey that was done in November of 2020 showed that there were 772 school psychologists in North Carolina. And the reason that number it varies from the previous slide is because this survey was done by NASP, by NCSPA, and they took out any school psychologist, licensed school psychologist, that is not performing the job duties of a school psychologist. So that's like people that are licensed as school psychologists but are performing administration jobs like a principal or even EC director, some compliance specialists, MTSS coach, that sort of thing. So it removed those. 44 districts posted 67 school psychologist positions, and even filling those positions would not meet the recommended ratio. There's currently about 1.4 million students enrolled in schools in North Carolina. And based on the recommendation ratio of 1 to every 500 students, we should have about 2,800 school psychologists in North Carolina. With just 772, we're short over 2,000 school psychologists. Even doubling the ratio to 1,000 students, which would still be a huge strain on a school psychologist, we would still need over 1,000 school psychologists to meet the needs of the students in North Carolina. Racheal, you're muted.
Thanks. So I just want to briefly talk about some of the reasons why jobs aren't being filled. And this is not an exhaustive list. There's some more things on here than just what we have. But like we've talked about, nobody wants to go into a county where there's a horrible ratio and they're just going to be seen as a tester. That's not what we've went to many, many years of school for. That's not what we're trained to do. And we don't want to go somewhere where we know there's not a supplement, there's not a salary there that's going to keep us and be able to use our skills the way that we need to. We don't want to have to work 2 jobs. No educators or public school employees should ever have to work 2 jobs. So when there's a non-competitive salary, that's not somewhere that's going to draw more people in. And when you're in a school system that you know doesn't pay for you to go to professional development, and there's no other psychologists on staff to be able to have collaboration and teamwork and professional development with, you're less likely to go to those areas. Places where there's a high turnover rate of EC directors or lack of support from central office are less likely to have people applying to those areas. And there are some psychologists that said they've applied to counties, but they've never heard back. So is there really a desire to have a school psychologist there, or are they just posting the job because they think that they need to? You know, we've talked about there being a shortage in reasons for it for a long time, and we don't want to focus on all of the reasons of why. We want to figure out what can we do about it. If you go to the next slide. One of the studies that came out of Western Carolina recently was talking about school psychologists and burnout, and not only not getting jobs, but school psychologists leaving the system because they're getting overworked, underappreciated, and underpaid. Some of the reasons that are helping lead to this burnout is we're not recruiting enough students to the graduate school programs. And the ones that we are, there's not enough that can have high levels of graduate students in the program. They have very small class sizes of kids that they can graduate. And the school psychologists reported that when they have high perceptions that they have no support, they have no external resources, they have really high job demands with no backup, high testing caseloads, and they don't have a chance to build those relationships with their coworkers, they're more likely to get burnout quicker. And we've seen with this that school psychologists that perceive that they have the broader, more comprehensive roles are less likely to have burnout. So it's really important when we look at what we need to do for solutions is how can we also help with the burnout issue. So now I want to talk about what does that look like in rural North Carolina. So according to the report that went to the General Assembly in February, there were 18 school districts that didn't have a full-time school psychologist at all. Of those 18 districts, only 4 of them had job postings. So we had a large number that don't have a school psychologist and don't have a position for a school psychologist to come to. 22 districts only had 1 full-time school psychologist for the entire county. There was also 9 districts that had 2 or less school psychologists to serve. So we have 40 counties across North Carolina that have 1 or less full-time school psychologists to serve the needs of all of the students in those systems. So that's the counties that have less than 1 full-time school psychologist. And there's the ones that have 2 or less. And as you can see, a lot of these districts are the rural districts.
So what does this mean for rural North Carolina students? There is a growing and unmet need for mental health services for children and youth. 1 in 5 children and adolescents experience a mental health problem during their school years, and serious mental health problems are on the rise, especially now with the pandemic. Teen suicide behavior is rising and it's the 2nd leading cause of death for 10 to 14-year-olds. North Carolina is ranked 43rd for youth mental health prevalence, and rural counties have significantly less access to mental health providers. That means Number 1 is the best. Number 51 is the worst because they can't be seen. We're 43rd on that list. That means we are not performing very well. Estimates of up to 60% of students do not receive treatment they need due to stigma or lack of access. And of those who do get help, nearly 2 out of 3 of them are doing so only in school. So when school psychologists are not there to help, there's a larger strain on the school system and other educators to provide support for these students, such as school counselors and school social workers, and they're often unable to provide the amount of services that are needed. School districts then have to rely on referring students and families to outside services. Not only do rural counties have less access to community mental health supports, but they're more likely to not have mental health supports as well in the school. Children with behavioral, social, emotional, and mental health concerns struggle to be successful in school, and these issues create barriers to learning for themselves and others and jeopardize their relationships with their teachers, peers, and parents. And that's what makes school the best place and an ideal place for them to be provided mental health services. If you could go to the next slide. Oh, skipped one. So we know the problem. There's 3 main issues at play. We're not training enough school psychologists. There's not enough graduate programs in North Carolina putting out enough students. New York, was oversaturated because within a 20-mile radius of where I went to school, there was dozens of other graduate programs putting out cohorts of 20 to 40 students per year. I graduated with 35 students in my cohort, and right down the road was another class graduating the same day of school psychologists. We don't have that in North Carolina. We're not graduating enough students, and the cohorts are smaller. We're not filling the current vacancies. So we only have a couple vacancies listed, but we're not even able to fill those. And then there's not enough funding for positions across North Carolina. We need more positions listed, and we need funding for more positions. What can we do? There's things we can do at the local level, the state level, and reaching out to parents and child advocacies and community agencies. There's things at every level that we can do. So Rachel's going to talk about some local district solutions that we can work on.
Yes, so now I'm to the part of the presentation where I really hope this is where all of you all can get the most from it. We know that there's been problems for a really long time. What are the solutions? What are some things that we can try to help? So we've broken this apart into what local districts can do and what state level can do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that we have, and we would love to get more feedback on what other solutions have worked for other people as well. One of the first things that school systems can do and school psychologists can advocate for is their hiring contract. A lot of people just sign a standard contract because when they ask, the human resources department says, we don't change contracts. That's what everybody gets. But you can actually ask for specific things in your school contracts. You can ask for a maximum limit of the number of schools that you can serve. You can ask for a maximum limit of, I'm only going to do this many special education evaluations for the year, and then the rest need to be contracted out or given to somebody else. You can explicitly state in school contracts a dollar amount of professional development to be paid by the school system for you to be able to get the professional learning that you need. You can get written in contracts things like supplements or sign-on bonuses or stipends for holding national certification, for serving for a multiple year contract, for serving low need schools. And you can explicitly state a bunch of different things like getting permission to reach out to psychologists from other counties to do monthly PLC meetings for professional learning communities. And there's even chances for you to say, I would love to bring more people into our district, our county. I would love to take interns. You should give me a stipend for every intern that I take, and then maybe more people will want to take interns and bring people into the field. And that's kind of what Samantha did. you want to talk about yours a little bit,
Yeah.
Samantha?
I almost forgot to unmute. So I think that my advocating for my contract just happened because I didn't need to leave my other district. I was choosing to because I wanted a more comprehensive role. So I was kind of a little bit braver in stating what I wanted. And I think that no one ever taught me that. And so something that we really can focus on is helping other school psychologists sort of take that stand and have that voice and advocate for themselves. So when I met with Stanley County Schools, they said, we're going to give you 11 schools and you will test at those schools and write reports, because that's all their school psychologists in the past had ever done. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. Here is the NASP practice model, and here's all the things I'm trained to do. And this is what a comprehensive role looks like to me. They actually printed another district's job description for the school psychologist, and we tweaked it a little bit to the needs of Stanley County Schools. But I was able to negotiate which schools I would serve, how many I would serve. I would not take 11. I had 4, which I felt was fair. I also was able to negotiate that I did not want to be based at county office. They really wanted me at county office, but where I should be is with the students. I serve students. I help students when they're in crises or when they're having meltdowns. I can't do that from a cubicle at a county office. And so that was something I worked into and I negotiated, was being able to have an office in the elementary school. I also was able to ask for Q Interactive, which cuts down on my time and my scoring and the amount of assessment time that I'm using. So I'm able to now have the iPads and do Q Interactive for certain students, which helps a lot with time. There's certain things that I'm negotiating now, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but for future years and next school year, I'm working on negotiating things, and I'm able to, now that I know I can and I can be brave. And I also am the only school psychologist here, so they're a little bit more willing to negotiate with me and work with me.
Another thing that local districts really need to try to look into is being able to fund and establish those internships. When you're able to get interns, you're able to pull a lot of people from out of state that don't have the chance to get a lot of paid internships. We have data that we're going to go over in just a couple slides of the answers that I got when I sent out a request to see how many counties actually had internship openings and how can we fill those. When you get an intern in your district and they are able to fall in love with the school system and do a comprehensive model, you're more likely to get them to stay there and to build their roots there. So we need to be able to fund and establish those internships, and we need to be flexible with how we're funding those. We can use money from student support services. We can use funding from curriculum and instruction. We can use grant that comes out from the General Assembly or the governor or the State Board of Education. I know right now that I'm paid through the GEARS grant that the governor did recently. Last year, there was a big push for CIS personnel sign-on bonuses. We can use those to pay internships. So being able to find a way to utilize that money and be able to pay somebody to come here with the hope that they'll fall in love and stay here is a really important step that we need to take. And we must recruit from out of state. We know that our programs are not enough to fill the vacancies that we have. So we do have to go to those other states, and we do have to use the benefit that the State Board of Education gave us last year when they gave us license reciprocity, where if you hold a national certification, coming to North Carolina and getting your licensure through DPI is a lot easier now. So we need to take advantage of that. And we need to be able to assign school psychologists based on reasonable ratios so they can provide the comprehensive services that they're trained to do. A lot of the stuff that came out of the school psychologist and school counselor survey said that most school psychologists were based on the expected number of special education referrals that the schools were expected. So you were assigned based on test caseloads. There were a couple that said, we only have some for the entire county. We don't assign them schools at all. They just kind of go wherever. So when we are able to put things in place to make it more practical for school psychologists to do what is in the best needs of students, we're going to be able to fill more vacancies. Some recommendations that we have for the state level solutions are aimed at the Department of Public Instruction, what the State Board of Education can do, what the legislators can do, what universities can do to help. I know the North Carolina School Psychology Association has really pushed for and advocated for a position at DPI to be able to help with recruitment and retention. A lot of the work that I've been trying to do to help with this over the past couple months is outside of work hours. And because I'm a random school psychologist from the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, I can't get the kind of responses that somebody at DPI can, who will be able to have the connections that we need. They'll be able to work with local school districts. They'll be able to work with universities from in and out of state. They'll be able to do a lot of things that will help with the shortages. Another thing is being able to assign school psychologists to the committees, the work groups, the task force, being able to make sure that we're using their comprehensive knowledge of the whole child and the whole supports that we need is really important to make sure we're not forgetting pieces that need to go into policies. And we need to increase our pay. We need to be able to find stipends to give to school psychologists to be able to keep them and retain them here. We can give school psychologists in the counties with the highest needs higher supplements because there's not a tax base in those local districts to be able to provide some of the supplements that the larger districts and counties have. We need to make it more equitable to be able to try to recruit to the highest areas of need that can't do it for themselves. We also need to be able to have school psychologists be supervised during their internships with high quality school psychologists that aren't just running around testing. When you're in your internship year, you need somebody that you can go to. You need somebody that can show you how to do the comprehensive model and really build the skill set and the foundation that you need as a practicing school psychologist. We need to be able to allow more positions to be open. Even if we fill the vacancies we have, we need more vacancies to fill as well. And we need to be able to make sure that we're supporting our universities. The universities need to be able to have enough funding to be able to accept larger graduate students, numbers of graduate students into their programs. So this is one thing that I want to go over. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Teach NC website. It was pushed out by NCDPI, and it lists all of the job openings in North Carolina, but I have found it not as easy to use. And it might just be me, but it breaks apart stuff into featured jobs and other related jobs. And I know when I searched for school psychology jobs across the state, speech language jobs came up and other related, but not what I was looking for jobs. So I've actually went and I've looked at every district's school psychology job postings, and they go from NC Teacher Match to doing AppleTrack applications to here's a Google Doc that shows the openings we have and you can email us for an application. And right now there are 44 school districts that have an active posting. And this number is the same that DPI reported in 2018 and 2019, but the school districts are a little different. So we still have the same number of districts asking for school psychologists. And of those 44 counties, there's a total of 67 different positions. One thing that I think is really important, because I've been talking about internships, is when you look at every single district, there are only 2 posted internship sites across the state. Only 2 places where an intern can go look online and find an internship. And when you look at this, this is all of the job openings across the state. You can really see, some of the areas that have the highest need, a lot of the rural counties that need school psychologists. So when we talk about internships, there's only 2 jobs posted across the state, and I knew that couldn't be right. So I emailed every exceptional children's director that I could find an email address for in the state that was for a public school system. And I got 41 responses back out of 110. So a lot of them said, you are not associated with NCDPI. This is not being pushed out from the North Carolina School Psychology Association, even though they would love to do this work, but there were not enough feet on the ground to do it. So we're not really going to answer you because you're just a school psychologist collecting this data for your own reasons. But of the 41 responses that I got, 31 districts said, yes, we need an intern. We will take an intern. When you look at the breakdown of how many internships they said, yes, we can guarantee this many spots, to this is how many we hope that we will be able to offer, there's over 50 internship sites potentially for North Carolina in less than half of the state, because only half of the state responded. So this is huge. This is really important. This shows that if we have somebody that's doing recruitment work, we can make some progress. This is the breakdown of everywhere that has said, yes, we can take an intern, no, we can't take an intern, and that we really hope we can get an intern. And when we finish the webinar, you'll be able to get a handout that has all of our hyperlinks in it, and you'll be able to go back and see on this, you know, what did they say the salary was going to be? How many positions did they say were going to be open? Who did they say you could contact for it? And I've emailed the majority of the National Association approved programs across the country, 125 out of the 198 so far, because that takes a really long time. And a lot of them have said, this is great information. We're going to share this with our students. This is really helpful. Thank you for reaching out. So this is something that we really need to keep working on and is really important for our state.
So I want to take just a minute now and talk a little bit about what parents and child advocates, public education advocates, and community groups can do. And one of the things that you can see that Racheal and Sam are doing is they are advocating. They're advocating every day by the way they do their work. They're advocating by trying to find out information and share it with other school psychologists about where you can get jobs and where there might be internships. And they're doing all this on their own, in their own time, out of their own, you know, love for the profession and their concern for children. So we need to join that advocacy work, right? And we need to be the ones advocating also for the needs in our area. So I encourage everyone who listens to this broadcast, either tonight or when it's recorded, that they find out what's going on in their own school district. This is really important. How many do we have? What schools are they assigned to? What are they doing in our schools? Are our kids in need of services, and what services are they not getting? This kind of basic information is really critical to help you advocate at your local school level. So what's some ways to get that information? Well, locally, you can go straight to your school board representative, right? Every one of us live in a school board district. Go talk to your representative to see if you can find out what's going on in your local school district. Advocate at your school board. Go speak at when they have school board meetings and a public hearing, and kind of talk about the helping professionals and how you want to make sure that your county has what it needs for your children. When you look at the statistics that we have shared with you tonight, I want to really emphasize to you that they are 6 months ago. They are 8 months ago. With this pandemic, what we have seen is anecdotal data that we don't have our hands on every minute for every single school system, but what we've seen is that every county is reporting increased numbers of homelessness, food insecurity, poverty, homelessness. We are seeing the reports of family domestic violence increasing. We've seen the number of shelters funded increase. We've seen the suicide alerts and go up, and we've seen groups that provide crisis intervention as nonprofits are reporting that their numbers are skyrocketed. So we know that there's a tremendous amount of need that's going unmet during this time. So also don't forget your county commissioners fund local positions. When you look at Wake County or Mecklenburg County, they have a much larger number of school psychologists than they are funded by the state. So they're using local funds. Their county commissioners are kicking in extra money to allow them to fund school psychologists, social workers, counselors, and such. So this is another way that you can advocate. Don't forget also the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education has their own staff. They also have lobbyists. They also work directly with the state superintendent and the North Carolina legislators. So make sure you go and share your information, your concerns with them. And then last, do not forget to talk to your legislators. Again, just like with school board, we all live in a Senate and a House district for North Carolina. Go to the website, North Carolina NCGA, North Carolina General Assembly, and find out, if you don't know, who your representative is. And make sure you let them know how you value helping professionals in your schools. This is really critical, especially when you know that the only minimum that we have in North Carolina is for one school psychologist per county. That is clearly not enough. And then I would encourage you, I've learned a whole lot from these women, but I've also learned a lot by going to the website, the North Carolina School Psychology Association. They have information there. They track when they do legislative actions there. When General Assembly is going to start on January the 13th. And so on January the 13th, we're going to have a new 2-year budget being set for the state of North Carolina, including our public education budget. So don't let these opportunities at the beginning of the year pass you by in terms of ways that you can do advocacy work. And then, last, one of the things Dr. Ruth and I will encourage you to do is to follow Public Schools First NC. We have been in this game for about 5 years of pushing really hard when there was not many other people paying attention, I'll have to say, to the need for helping professionals in our schools. And we've really ramped this up the last 3 years, 2 years, and this past year. And so we are very dedicated to seeing that these critical positions are in every school, because we believe our mission is that every single child has a constitutional right in North Carolina to a sound basic education. And we know there are a lot of barriers to many children being able to reach success academically. And we know that school psychologists are a key part of kids being more successful. Dr. Ruth, I wanted to see if you thought I left anything out that you think we need to add.
You covered everything, and what I would just like to add very briefly is that don't forget your PTAs. Your PTAs are connected to a statewide network, and the parent voice is really strong when you're speaking to legislators, your school board members, and also parents are the ones that meet and talk directly with the support professionals. And so I think that's a key group to really keep in mind that have connections throughout the state.
Very good. So is there hope?
There is hope. So Cabarrus County was able to advocate and get a group of lead school psychologists, nurses, social workers, and school counselors to create a group at the central office. And their work has led to a comprehensive model that uses proportionality to add positions and funding in order to recruit and have a more comprehensive role for school psychologists and for other school professionals. Rockingham County has been able to become involved in more of a comprehensive model, so their school psychologists are doing more of a comprehensive role, and they play an intricate role in their risk and suicide assessments in the county, as well as mental health support. So there is hope there too. And then I spoke a little bit about my county. They were able and willing to negotiate with me and allow me to provide a comprehensive role. They paid for me to get the prepare training. I am now the mental health liaison for the county, so I'm able to help. I lead every, when we do have a crisis, I lead the team and kind of direct them on next steps. So I'm able to do my comprehensive role at my county. I'm also negotiating with the county right now for me to be able to take an intern for next year. I think it's extremely important for the reasons Racheal mentioned. I am born and raised in New York. I know how difficult it is to leave the state that you were spending your whole life in and move to a new state. And so I bring a different perspective to students that may be wanting to leave that saturated state and come to North Carolina. I also have connections with my university back in New York, and they've already been sending me emails of, will you take an intern? We have students looking to leave New York. And so that is really encouraging. We should encourage students to come here. If we can get students to come here and love it, like Racheal said, that's what happened to me. I loved it here. My supervisor at Rowan Salisbury Schools was amazing, and she did a great job of raising me and making sure that I got every experience I needed. And she's still a great mentor, someone I consider a friend and text frequently. And so she made me love it here. I ended up not staying at that district, but I still am filling one of the vacancies. And so we can get students here and just kind of allow them to be comprehensive school psychologists, pay them for their internship, and provide. I'm also trying to negotiate for me to receive a stipend for training an intern, because it is a lot of work. And I believe that if other school psychologists in my county eventually will see that I got a stipend for raising an intern, maybe they'll want to take an intern, or maybe my intern, when they become able to take an intern, they'll want to take an intern. And that's sort of how we build capacity in our state and how we get other people from other states to come here. And so there is hope. There's some counties leading the way. We know there's other counties out there working on this work and really advocating for their school psychologists. And so we can do it. We just all need to do it together. And we all need to make sure we're addressing all areas. So that local, that state funded, state level, the parent and advocates and community solutions. It's going to take a lot, but we can get there.
Excellent. So we're going to take a few seconds now and try to answer a few questions. I don't think that anyone listening tonight isn't impressed with the amount of information that was provided tonight and the passion and dedication to their profession than we've seen with Racheal and Sam. Terrence, do you see any questions here that we need to answer?
Yeah, so first, several of them just gave some of their credentials, and so we have a Master of Psychology on, we have a autism specialist teacher, the EC teacher on, but one of their questions that was in the box is, how do I get my license working as a school psychologist?
So right now there are 5 NASP approved programs in North Carolina that will allow someone to become a school psychologist. I think most of the programs in North Carolina, you'll get a master's degree in psychology and you'll get a certificate of advanced studies. And right now there's a FELS program for forgiveness education loans. And so you can get it paid to be able to go into a program and become a school psychologist. There's a 1,200-hour internship, which is what we've been talking about getting paid for doing. So you can go on to the National Association of School Psychologists website and get those program contact information details. But I know one of the practicum students that we have right now is a teacher, and she's able to do both at the same time.
Okay, and I would just add, if by any chance we do not, if you didn't get your question answered just quite the way you wanted tonight, Sam and Racheal have graciously agreed to put their contact information here, so I hope you'll take a minute to copy that down, because I think that I know these 2 women and they'll be more than happy to follow up and help you talk about how you can advance yourself in terms of this work. One thing I hope that you'll do, if you look at these 67 vacancies, I hope you'll call everybody you know in another state and see if you can talk them into moving to North Carolina, because there's clearly job openings. There may be towns and cities outside of North Carolina that are experiencing high unemployment, but the North Carolina public school system has some great job openings all across the state. The other question that someone has here is that how many school districts do you think are using contracted services for testing only? Do you have any notion about that? Any idea about how that, Racheal or Samantha?
I know that a lot of systems are doing both contracted psychology services as well as full-time psychologists. I think in almost every district that I've worked in, we've had to contract out some of our evaluations. I'm not sure how many solely do contract. I'm hoping the ones that don't have a psychologist at all at least contract out their evaluations. I'm not sure what else they would do. So I'd say at least the 20 probably have only contracted services.
And someone wants to know how to get involved in the North Carolina School Psychologists Association. Can a non-school psychologist join, is what someone's asking.
There are a bunch of different membership types for the North Carolina School Psychology Association. I know there are ways for students to become members, practitioners to be members, and I think there is a category for non-school psychologists to be able to become members, but I don't remember off the top of my head what the name of that category is. But it is an awesome association. They work really hard. They're great with advocacy, and they would love to have more members. Okay.
And Sam, they want to know, how do you get a vacation if you're the only school psychologist and there's 8,500 kids?
I don't. I mean, I take sick days just like everybody else. I try not to get sick on the days I know I have counseling students. I have a separate cell phone that I almost always have available and with me in case there's a crisis or and I'm not on that campus or in the building at that time. I have been called for a crisis on a Sunday and worked the entire day with the crisis team. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm extremely thankful for my job because I'm not just testing and report writing, and I get to be involved in the crises. So I guess when I do take days off, they just kind of pause anything that I would have been doing. But hopefully that will change soon and we can recruit more school psychologists and I won't be the only one anymore.
I think it really, though, this question really does beg the points that you were making earlier in the presentation, how having just another person, having another intern, having someone there that you can not only feel like if I need a day off or I need a vacation, I'm not letting my kids down or I'm not missing something that I need to be doing, how psychologically important that is. It's just as tough as, you know, the single mom or single dad scenario, right? Where you feel like you're always on duty and there's no one there to back you up. And so I really also love the conversations y'all been having about the internships, because the fact that school districts are so eager to say, yes, I may not be advertising one, but I'm interested in it. So this seems like if you're a parent or you're a community child advocate right now listening to this, this would be a really easy way for you to go, a soft approach, if you would, to your local school board or your school, your local county commission to talk about funding 2 or 3 internships a year as a way to build a path towards filling permanent positions and as a way to have some relief in each of your schools. Let me just go ahead, since we're running out of time. I do want to bring this last slide up, because it's just kind of a summary slide to me, and that, you know, everything that we're saying kind of in a nutshell. And that is that the National Association and the School North Carolina Association as well recommends that we have a school psychologist for every 500 students. So think about that for a second. And what is going on actually in North Carolina? So based on our budget, the North Carolina budget, they're funding a school psychologist for every 2,483 students. Now, because we have some counties that are able to use local funds to fund some of these positions, the overall ratio, when you count the number of registered public school students against the number of filled positions, is around 1,000 to 1 to 2,000. So that looks a little bit better, but really, I think it doesn't take much for us to see what we're talking about here. For every school psychologist we actually have in North Carolina practicing right now, we need 2 more. That is pretty startling. That is really underserving our children. And if we think that our children are important enough, if the state legislators agree that this service is important enough to require at least 1 per county, I think it's an indication of their acknowledgement of the value. But what they're not acknowledging right now is the severe underfunding that they're providing for these professionals. So we clearly have a lot of challenges tonight, and I'll ask Racheal or Sam if you'd like to make any closing remarks before we close our webinar tonight.
I'm good. Thank you, everybody.
I would just say that I hope some of these solutions will be able to help someone somewhere, and that I would love any feedback on other solutions that people have found. We'd love to hear from districts about what they've been able to do that really works. And I hope that, you know, you can reach out to everyone that you know and advocate and find your inner voice and use it.
Sam, I'll give you a second to share your thoughts in closing.
I would just say that if anyone has any questions or recommendations or anything, to please send us an email. Racheal and I are both available and would love to collaborate and maybe provide suggestions or help. If anyone is wanting to advocate for themselves, like I did for myself, and they just need a coach or someone to help them do that, please reach out to me and I will let you know everything I did so that way we can hopefully build more success stories throughout North Carolina.
So I appreciate, I just want to say on behalf of myself and on behalf of Dr. Ruth and Public Schools First NC, it has really been an honor to work with you on this presentation. I've been personally touched by your dedication and passion to your children and your, you know, the public school kids attending your schools. I've been professionally impressed with the extra effort you've made to develop your own skills, as well as to share these skills with others and to take extra time to try to better your profession. Very impressed with both of you, and I thank you for giving us your time tonight. We will be sharing this with some of our legislators, and we hope that we'll have future webinars and talk more about what's going on. Again, I remind everyone that January the 13th is a really important date in our state when the North Carolina General Assembly begins its new session, and where we will be setting a 2-year budget that would determine all of these kind of funding issues. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Terrence, to bring it home.
All righty, very briefly, again, thank you, Sam. Thank you, Racheal. Again, amazing information, and definitely can hear your passion through your presentation. For those of you who are joining us today and joined us this evening, please connect with us and stay informed. We are on every platform. We're on Facebook, We're on Instagram. We are on Twitter. You can also email us. If you go to our website, we have resources on this topic and several others. We have tools that you can use, toolkits that you can use. But also, more importantly, this recording will be stored both on our Facebook and on our website. We would love for you to come and visit us. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to say good night to everyone, and thank you again to our audience, and thank you to our panelists. And we hope that everyone continues to be interested in this subject and follows us to find out more. So I always like to end by saying, you know, stay tuned. We're in this for the long haul, and we hope to see some progress this legislative session. Good night.